Hello. Um, I hope you can tell by the jacket that I am a chef by trade, not an attorney. I've been cooking for about 20 years, and in 2007 reached the peak of my career, which was to own my own restaurant. I bought into a restaurant in downtown or uptown area of Dallas, and was the executive chef and co-owner of this restaurant. Same year, the economy in our country tanked into the second worst recession that the country's ever seen, and I thought to myself, what have I done? I had sold a house, took out the equity, took out a loan to pay off the rest of the debt to buy into this restaurant, and then thought, I've made the greatest mistake of my life. That first year of owning the restaurant, I grew the business 38%, was nominated for Best Chef in Dallas, and life couldn't have been better. In that first year, I also had an opportunity to teach 8 young men in one of the Dallas County juvenile detention facilities how to make ice cream for an ice cream competition at the Dallas Farmers Market. The moment that I met these 8 boys, I realized something that I didn't know before I had met them, and that was that I had stereotyped them. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they sag their pants, the way they're tattooed up, which if I didn't have a chef coat on would make me a little bit of a hypocrite. I was wrong. All 8 of these young men looked me in the eye when they spoke to me, and every single one of them called me sir. Now, as I mentioned, I've been cooking for 20 years. I've been called a lot of names in a lot of kitchens in a lot of languages. Never once in any language was that name sir. These 8 young men were so eager to learn and so enthusiastic to do something that they could be proud of, most of which you could tell that was a first-time feeling. At 16, 17, 15 years old, first time in their lives they were ever able to say, I did this. So we made ice cream. Now, when I tell you that for these 8 young men, raspberry was a flavor of candy, they had never seen or tasted a fresh raspberry, you can imagine how mind-blowing it was for them when I made them taste fresh tarragon. I believe the exact quote was, sir, you want us to eat grass? And I said, yes, delicious licorice-flavored grass. So we made ice cream, and 2 days later, we went down to the farmer's market, and these 8 young men in their little khaki pants and beaten-up white t-shirt, jail attire, handed out their ice cream samples alongside college culinary students with the biggest smiles, the biggest barrel chests out, just beaming full of pride. And at the end of the competition, one of the boys actually won the whole thing. Beat the college students, beat everybody. And when he won, this young man, tattooed up, pants sagging, came running up to me, bent his knees, and cocked his arms, and at the top of his lungs screamed at me like a 5-year-old that had just gotten the greatest video game in the history of video games for Christmas, screams, "Sir, I just love to cook!" And I bent my knees and cocked my arms and screamed as loud as he did and said, "Sir, me too!" And he said, "I just love to make food and give it to people and put a smile on their face." And it struck me. Number one, he could have said, "I want to make food and make money so I can pay my bills," which is why every other person I know that owns restaurants does it. He could have said, "I want to make food, make money, and be famous," which is why a lot of people I know own restaurants or cook. But he said, "I want to make food and give it to people and put a smile on their face." And it reminded me that the first time I met him, I had stereotyped him. It also reminded me of my childhood, because I am Texas born and Texas bred, which means that I grew up having Sunday supper at my grandparents' house every Sunday. So food to me meant a lot more than just eating. It was about family, it was about love, it was about camaraderie, and it really touched me when he said, "I just love to make food and give it to people and put a smile on their face." He said to me, "When I get out, I'm going to get a job in a restaurant." and then asked my professional opinion on whether he should work at Wendy's or Chili's. My answer, whoever hires you first. And I drove home that day, and I knew that I was never going to see him again. He is a juvenile under custody of the juvenile department. They are not going to hand out any type of personal or private information of a child to a stranger. I also knew, not to the extent I do now, but I knew that the moment that he went home, the odds of him actually getting a job at a Wendy's or Chili's were very, very slim. Because at the end of the day, he's going to go right back to the same house, the same street, the same neighborhood, the same school, the same gangs, the same every single thing that had led him at 15 years old straight to jail. And I thought, it's not fair. It's not right. Somebody has got to do something about this. And I blamed every one of you for not doing something. How dare you? And then I realized that I was being a hypocrite because by blaming you, I wasn't taking accountability. And I thought, I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I tried to figure out something to do. It took me about a year working with the juvenile department, working with another organization that did some programs and classes inside juvenile facilities to try to figure out how can I help these kids see how great they are? How can I empower them to live to their full potential? The two things that they kept telling me in working with the kids is you have to provide something with consistency and stability, consistency and stability. And at the end of the day, the only thing that I knew consistently well and was the stability of my life was the restaurant. And so I decided I just want to open a restaurant and let these kids run it. But I realized that a restaurant is not enough because just giving these kids a job is like putting a Band-Aid on a waterfall. The juvenile justice industry term to describe the population that I work with is throwaway. These are children, teenage children, that have been discarded since the day they were born by their family, by their streets, their neighborhoods, their communities, which means that they have no access to housing, no access to health care, no access to food, no access to education, no access to jobs. So if you really want to help these kids, you really have to do something that holistically addresses all of these needs. So I built a restaurant, Café Momentum, a 12-month paid post-release internship for young men and young ladies coming out of juvenile detention. In addition to working their way through every station in the restaurant, washing dishes, bussing tables, prep cook, line cook, server, host, hostess, we also focus on life skill and social skill training, and we have a case management team that works to build an ecosystem of support around the kids, addressing issues like homelessness, addressing issues like hunger, addressing issues like healthcare. I think this sounds like a great idea. I did then, I still do now. But back then, when I would tell people, I'm going to open up a restaurant, I'm going to take kids out of jail and teach them to play with knives and fire, and I need your money, I was laughed out of every room that I went into. And I was presented with a myriad of stereotypes that were far greater than even what I had surmised on my own. Things like, what are you going to do when those kids stab each other in the kitchen? Those kids, they don't want a job, they just want to collect a check. Those kids have never been to a nice restaurant. Those kids don't know good food. Those kids can't do that. Those kids aren't smart. And I knew that I had to figure out a way to break through that stereotype. So in June of 2011, we launched a very first pop-up dinner. And the idea was really simple. Go into one of the top restaurants in Dallas on a Sunday night when they're closed, sell tickets to a private dinner, have the chef write a 4-course menu, but his or her staff to execute the food in the kitchen and serve it to the level and quality of service of that restaurant. Were 8 kids that we would bus in from juvenile detention. Now, full disclosure, that very first dinner, I had no idea if anybody would show up. I had a plan to call my mom and have her guilt the ladies in her Bible study class into buying tickets to go to the dinner. But in 24 hours, with only 2 people posting a link to the dinner to buy tickets, we exceeded our goal of 50 by almost 50% before we could shut the PayPal down. That very first dinner, 68 people showed up at the dinner, and before they left, every single one of them either shook my hand or gave me a hug and said, this could be my son. And that told me immediately that all stereotypes had been broken. We did 41 of those dinners over 3.5 years, ramping up to the restaurant opening. The restaurant opened, and for the first 3 months, I developed a severe psychological complex because for 3 straight months, every person that would come in the restaurant would stop me and go, the food's really good. They were shocked. And I thought, what the hell? I've won awards. I ran a successful restaurant. Why are you surprised? What's wrong with my cooking abilities that people would be so surprised? And I realized, even through 3.5 years of dinners, opening up this restaurant, people still didn't think that the kids could do it. So in March of 2015, Leslie Brenner of the Dallas Morning News showed up for her first of 3 visits. And if you don't know anything about Leslie, know that she has a reputation nationally to be hypercritical of every restaurant that she reviews, and typically she's known to be very harsh. So you can imagine how nervous I was when she showed up, and at the end of the evening when she said, I wasn't expecting this. And I just looked at her and said, well, with all due respect, coming from you, that's the scariest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. She wrote of our restaurant that on any given night, we can go toe-to-toe with the best restaurants in the city. And subsequently, in the fall of 2015, Eater Dallas named us Restaurant of the Year, and the Dallas Observer named us the best new restaurant of 2015. All accolades that we're very proud of because it proves that these kids can rise to whatever level of expectation you set for them, as long as you give them the tools, the resources, the guidance, and the love to get there. Now, over the course of 3.5 years of pop-up dinners, in a little over 2 years of being open, we've now worked with almost 450 kids. And of those 450 kids, we've actually studied outcomes to know if what we're doing is really effective above and beyond just teaching them how to cook. Of those 450 kids, statistically speaking, 47% of them, or roughly half, should have gone back to jail within 12 months. That is the recidivism rate or reincarceration rate for juvenile offenders in the state of Texas. At Café Momentum, 15.2% have ever gone back to jail at all, which means, as I like to say, Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings owes me a check for about $14 million because that's how much money we've saved taxpayers since we first started working with these young men and young ladies. Out of 450 kids, on average, they're 2 grade levels behind. 62% of them are homeless when they come to us. If you're 15, 16 years old and you're homeless, that typically also means you've been abandoned, which comes with its own set of trauma-related issues. Our kids come to work every day, and what they eat at the restaurant is typically all they get to eat from the time they get there, from the time they leave until the time they come back the very next day. All of these issues, all of these obstacles, and yet when you give them a little bit of confidence and tell them they're good, they begin to believe in themselves. They stop doing things like criminal acts and going back to jail, and they start doing things like becoming contributing, productive members of their community. They start doing things like achieving their own potential. I'll give you one example of a young man that graduated from our program last April, about a year ago. His name is Abasai, and Abasai is a second-generation Mexican immigrant. That means his parents crossed the border illegally and worked jobs that illegal immigrants worked. And in the meantime, they got married and started a family, and they ended up getting divorced. When they got divorced, they took a household of poverty and divided it into 2 households of higher poverty, and yes, that is a thing, which meant that Abasai went from having some stuff to having nothing and being afraid to ask his mom for things that she would complain that his dad was supposed to provide, and afraid to ask his dad for things that he would complain that his mom was supposed to provide. So he turned to the streets to figure out how to take care of himself. And when I say how to take care of himself, I mean how to have shoes to wear to school, how to have pencils to write with in school, how to have food for he and his brother and sister in the evening. He got in trouble and went to jail. Upon going to jail, he went through our program. Abasai graduated from our program and went to work with one of our employment partners, the Hilton Anatole, and within 3 months he was promoted. At 17 years old, Abasai is making between $700 and $1,000 a week, which makes him the breadwinner of either household. He has full health benefits, a paid vacation, and a 401k. In January, I got to go and watch Abasai walk across the stage as the first high school graduate ever of his family, and he is about to enroll as a full-time college student at El Centro College. What this tells us is that the effect goes beyond Abasai. What it tells us is that his children will not grow up in poverty. What it tells us is that his children will grow up in a household where graduating high school is expected, where going to college is expected, and where being a contributing member of your community is expected. And that is why we call it Momentum. Thank you.